King's College in New York, now called Columbia University, and the College of New Jersey, now known as Princeton, are less than 60 miles apart from each other, but in the lead up to the American Revolution, they took radically different positions on the issues of the day. Both had trained up patriots of the era, to be sure, Princeton boasting the father of the Constitution, James Madison, and Columbia educating a young Alexander Hamilton, the famous Federalist. But while Princeton contributed several officers to the Continental Army, all but 2 of the professors at Columbia supported the British government. Princeton was headed by John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, while Columbia's president Myles Cooper had to flee America on a British warship on the eve of the Revolution due to his outspoken rebuke of the American Whigs. So how did these 2 institutions in the Middle Colonies end up so far apart, and why does it matter for us today? Princeton was founded in 1746, and Columbia held its first classes less than a decade later in 1754, but both colleges saw significant growth in the 60s and 70s leading up to the Revolution. While they were both nominally non-sectarian, Princeton quickly leaned towards Presbyterianism, while Columbia became a de facto Anglican institution. At Columbia, this religious affiliation came with serious controversy. In its 1754 charter, the dissenters from the Church of England, who were the majority in Dutch New York at the time, won the concession that students from any denomination must be admitted, but the charter also stipulated that the president must be an Anglican. Furthermore, the board of directors was headed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and this led to considerable power from the Church of England over the institution. This gap only grew over time as Columbia secured significant funds from London, and by the 1770s there was a formal requirement to pray for King George, with students disciplined for refusal. Princeton, by contrast, had significant roots not in the institutional Church of England, but in New Light Presbyterianism, with Great Awakening luminaries like Jonathan Edwards and Samuel Davies counted among its first presidents. While both colleges were devout, there is little doubt that the radical evangelical character of the revivalists at Princeton led to a much more radical approach to government and liberty during the Revolution, and fewer ties to the crown. There are also cultural and curriculum differences between the schools. Princeton, through Witherspoon, would embrace Scottish common sense philosophy and classical liberalism, exposing the students to philosophers like Locke and Hume. Columbia, on the other hand, would take a more traditional route with a continuing emphasis on the classics. Historian Gregory Afinogenov argues that the agrarian impulse towards the classics at Columbia would lead to loyalism as the members withdrew from the radical society into more contemplative perspectives. This detached view is possible in part due to the class differences at Columbia. Columbia was the most expensive school in the colonies, and it attracted a more established student body, not of independent planters and merchants, but of upper-class professionals like doctors who were more invested in the status quo. But even with the religious and cultural differences leading to a more loyalist Columbia and a patriotic Princeton, the differences would be less pronounced had it not been for 2 key leaders. John Witherspoon, the president of Princeton, was a radical patriot. His sermon, The Dominion of Providence over the Passions of Man, was an influential defense of the rights of the colonies to rebel against unjust authority, and he would go on to serve in the Continental Congress until he was replaced by fellow Princeton professor William Houston. Columbia, on the other hand, installed a young Oxford graduate named Myles Cooper, who made a conscious effort to increase ties to Britain. In a series of pamphlets, Cooper would bemoan the protests related to the tea tax, saying that even the minor grievance that Boston had was not justification to respond in a petulant and disrespectful manner. Throughout his tenure from 1765 to 1775, Cooper would increase the financial connection to London, the religious ties to the Church of England, and the political submission to the British Crown. So, why do the political leanings of 2 colleges from 250 years ago matter? Well, it does help to give us a more nuanced understanding of our nation's founding, and reminds us that even in the Revolutionary period, there were those who continued to support the British system. It also shows us how differences in religion and curriculum can have a profound impact on the culture of a college in addressing the important social issues of the time. And it gives us an example of how intentional leadership can shape a rising generation, either towards liberty or to submission to the government.